As night fell, bringing with it the damp cold and the unknown sounds of the jungle, the elderly woman trembled, more from fear than from chill. Her tear-filled eyes swept the darkness, searching for a hope that did not come. It was then that an imposing shadow emerged from the dense foliage, a jaguar, majestic and silent, with eyes that glowed like embers in the gloom. The elderly woman's heart pounded, expecting the end, but the beast did not advance with aggression. Instead, with an almost reverent slowness, the jaguar approached, lay down beside the woman, and with a deep sigh, offered its warm body as a shield against the cold and the invisible dangers of the night. The force of nature, which the cruel man expected to be her executioner, revealed itself. In its purest and most instinctive form, a guardian, the elderly woman's heart, still racing, began to slow to an almost imperceptible rhythm. It was not the end she expected, but an even stranger and more incomprehensible beginning. The warmth of the jaguar's massive body radiated through her thin clothes, an animal warmth, wild, yet undeniably comforting against the penetrating chill of the island night. She could feel the animal's deep, steady breath, a low sound that vibrated in the humid air, a pulse of wild life beside her. Her eyes, accustomed to the darkness, tried to discern the beast's contours. Its fur, a mosaic of dark rosettes, seemed almost to glow in the gloom, a mesmerizing pattern of lethal beauty. The jaguar's scent was strong, earthy, an aroma of forest and hunt, which should have evoked terror but which somehow now conveyed a strange sense of security. It was as if the jungle itself had materialized into a protective form, a cruel and sublime paradox. Night advanced, and with it the island's nocturnal symphony intensified. Distant howls, rustling leaves, the incessant hum of invisible insects. Every sound was a reminder of her vulnerability, her insignificance in that hostile environment. But, beside the jaguar, these sounds seemed less threatening. It was as if the great feline's presence created a bubble of relative calm, an improvised sanctuary in the heart of the wild. She risked a minimal movement just to adjust her position, and the jaguar did not react, remaining still, a monument of dormant strength. Slowly, exhaustion began to conquer fear. The elderly woman, who expected to die of cold or be devoured, found herself in an unimaginable situation. The fatigue of a day of terror and despair, coupled with emotional shock, began to take its toll. Her muscles relaxed a little, and she allowed herself to sink into the damp sand, leaning against the living warm wall that was the jaguar. It was a surrender, not to death, but to a form of existence she could never have predicted. The elderly woman's mind, once filled with panic, now drifted between disbelief and a strange acceptance. Where was the man who had abandoned her? Where was the son-in-law who had condemned her to this slow and terrible death? He surely imagined she would be trembling with cold at the mercy of predators or already dead. But the reality was different. Nature, in its unpredictability, had subverted his cruel plans. The jaguar, the apex predator of the island, was now her shield, her unexpected guardian. Small noises in the nearby foliage, perhaps a rodent or a nocturnal bird, made the elderly woman startle, but the jaguar remained impassive, its eyes, once embers, now dark slits in deep sleep. It was as if its mere presence was a warning, an invisible barrier to any smaller creature that dared to approach. The elderly woman felt a strange warmth spread in her chest, not just the physical warmth of the jaguar, but something deeper, a spark of hope, or perhaps just the pure wonder of survival against all odds. Hours dragged on, marked only by the subtle change in the intensity of the jungle sounds. At some point, the elderly woman must have fallen asleep, a light and fragmented sleep, punctuated by nightmares of abandonment and visions of teeth and claws. But each time she woke with a start, The comforting reality of the warm, breathing body beside her brought her back. The jaguar was there, always there. When the first pale rays of dawn began to filter through the dense canopy of trees, painting the sky in shades of grey and pink, the island began to awaken. The nocturnal sounds diminished, replaced by the chirping of birds and the soft murmur of the ocean. The faint light revealed the woman's aged face, marked by the night of terror, but with a new and faint light in her eyes. She looked at the jaguar. The animal was still sleeping, its heavy head resting on its paws, its large, muscular body a mound of fur and strength. The creature's wild beauty was even more evident in the daylight. Perfectly drawn rosettes, long, sensitive whiskers, the powerful curve of its spine. The elderly woman extended a trembling hand, hesitating for a long moment. It was an irrational, dangerous impulse, but something compelled her. The need to touch, to confirm that this was not a dream, that this majestic and fearsome creature was real, and for one night had been her protector. Her hand stopped inches from the fur. The fear was still there, a cold current beneath the surface of her newfound courage. But the jaguar, as if sensing her hesitation, slowly opened its eyes. Those eyes, which the night before had glowed like embers, were now a deep, penetrating amber fixed on her. There was no aggression, only an ancient, wild, and incomprehensible curiosity. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the sea. The jaguar moved, a slow, powerful stretch that made its muscles ripple under its skin. The elderly woman held her breath, expecting the inevitable, the moment the beast would remember its true nature. But the jaguar merely stood up, majestic and unhurried, and looked at the woman once more, a gaze that seemed to carry the wisdom of 1,000 years of jungle. Then, with the same reverent slowness with which it had approached the night before, the jaguar turned and, without making the slightest sound, disappeared into the dense foliage, leaving the elderly woman alone again. The warmth of its body still seemed to permeate the sand, but the physical presence was gone. The island, with its dangers and mysteries, once again became a place of solitude and uncertainty. The elderly woman was alive, but what would the day bring, now that her wild guardian had departed? The tension, which the night had disguised with a cloak of protection, returned with the sunlight, sharper and more relentless than ever. She had survived the night, but the journey was just beginning. The light of dawn broke the promise of safety, the warmth radiating from the jaguar, a shield against the cold and fear, dissipated with the beast's silent departure. The elderly woman, who for one night had found an improbable refuge in the arms of the wild, was alone again. The earthy scent of the jaguar still lingered in the humid air, a ghost of protection that made her question if it had all been a feverish delusion. But the crushed sand beside her, the residual warmth that still emanated from where the animal had rested, were irrefutable proofs. The jaguar had existed, and now it was no longer there. The sun, which before seemed a distant friend, now revealed itself as a relentless enemy. Its rays, filtered by the dense foliage, drew patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor, revealing the treacherous beauty of the island. Every leaf, every exotic flower, every twisted trunk seemed to hide a danger, a mystery. The solitude, which the night had masked with the jaguar's presence, returned with overwhelming force, heavier than the fear of predators. It was the solitude of being completely at the mercy, completely forgotten. Her body, aged and weak, protested with every movement. The damp, cold sand had stiffened her muscles, and hunger and thirst, which the terror of the night had suppressed, now cried out for attention. Her mouth was dry, her throat scratched, and her empty stomach ached. Surviving the night had been a miracle. But the day brought with it a new and brutal reality, the need to find water, food, and shelter that was not the body of a wild jaguar. With a monumental effort, the elderly woman stood up. Her legs trembled and her head spun. Every step was a battle against weakness and despair. She looked around, her eyes searching for any sign of hope, any indication of fresh water or edible fruit. The vegetation was lush, verdant, but also impenetrable, a labyrinth of broad leaves, tangled vines, and gigantic trees whose names she did not know. The sea, once a horizon of promises, was now an insurmountable barrier, a constant reminder of her isolation. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a mansion exuding luxury and indifference, the millionaire son-in-law awoke. The morning sun filtered through silk curtains, illuminating a room worth more than many lives. He stretched on Egyptian cotton sheets, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. In his mind, his elderly mother-in-law was already a distant memory, an inconvenience resolved. He imagined her trembling with cold, perhaps already a victim of some creature of the night, or wasting away under the scorching sun. In his universe of power and control, nature was merely a backdrop for his whims, and human life, when it did not serve him, was disposable. He could not have been more mistaken. Back on the island, the elderly woman advanced slowly, feeling her way. The air was heavy, humid, and the hum of invisible insects was a constant soundtrack. She heard the rustling of leaves, the snapping of branches, every sound amplified by her fear and her solitude. Was it a rodent, a snake, or something larger, more dangerous? The jaguar's protection, however brief, had altered her perception of the jungle. She knew death lurked, but she also knew that life, in its wildest and most unexpected forms, could offer a chance. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom of night, now strained to discern details under the intense light. She saw colorful fruits hanging from unknown trees, but the fear of poison prevented her from touching them. The salty seawater was useless. She needed fresh water. Hope, fragile as a spider's web, propelled her. Every step was a silent prayer, an appeal to the same nature that had abandoned her and, strangely, protected her. She tripped on an exposed root, falling to her knees on the damp earth. A sharp pain shot through her leg, but she barely felt it. Despair threatened to engulf her. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face, mixing with dust and sweat. It was useless. She was old, weak, and alone. Where was the jaguar now? Had it abandoned her forever, or was it merely a nocturnal hunter, following its wild instincts? But then, a sound, a soft drip, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere ahead. She raised her head, her tear-filled eyes trying to focus. Dragging herself, she followed the sound, her heart beating with a new and faint hope. Between moss-covered rocks, a small stream of crystal-clear water trickled, forming a shallow puddle. It was a miracle, a gift from the island, or perhaps a last act of mercy. She knelt, her trembling hands plunging into the cool water. She drank eagerly, feeling life slowly return to her veins. It was not enough to quench her hunger, but it was a start, a reminder that, even in the cruelest of solitudes, life found a way. The sun began to move in the sky, and the elderly woman knew the day was far from over. The water was a temporary relief, but the dangers of the island still surrounded her, and night, relentless, would soon return, bringing with it the same fears, but without the comforting presence of her wild guardian. The journey was just beginning, and with each step the tension mounted, a knot tightening in her chest. The fresh water was a balm, a breath of life in her parched throat. But the relief was fleeting. Thirst, though quenched, gave way to ravenous hunger, a hungry void in her stomach that seemed to drain her last energies. The elderly woman stood, her legs still trembling, but with a new determination. Survival was not just a matter of avoiding predators. It was a daily battle against the elements, against nature itself, which for a brief moment had been her ally. She looked around, the jungle's exuberance now seeming less inviting and more threatening. The gigantic trees, with their dense canopies, blocked the sun, creating a labyrinth of shadows and humidity. Vibrantly colored fruits hung from branches, but the memory of stories about tropical poisons prevented her from even considering them. Every leaf, every flower, every insect seemed to carry a secret, an unknown threat. Where to find safe food, where to find shelter before night, with its terrors, returned. With every step, her aged body protested. Her muscles ached, her joints creaked, and weakness threatened to bring her down. She dragged herself along, her eyes fixed on the ground, searching for something familiar, something she could recognize as edible. But the island's flora was alien, wild, and unforgiving. Time seemed to stretch and shrink simultaneously. The sun, which before was an enemy, was now a clock, slowly moving across the sky, announcing the imminent arrival of darkness. Meanwhile, in his world of opulence and nonchalance, the millionaire son-in-law enjoyed a late lunch. Served on a veranda overlooking the turquoise ocean, he savored exotic delicacies, toasting with expensive wine to his own cleverness. The image of his mother-in-law, alone and defenseless on the island, was a distant thought, a muffled echo that could not penetrate the bubble of his egoism. He smiled, satisfied with the solution he had found for his problem. To him, the island was just a dot on the map, a convenient place to discard what did not serve him. He could not imagine the hell his mother-in-law was living, nor the strange alliance that nature had forged to protect her. Back on the island, the elderly woman continued her desperate search. The air grew heavier, the heat more suffocating, the hum of insects intensified, and the rustling of leaves seemed to hide more than just the wind. She heard a distant snap, a sound that made her heart race. Was it the jaguar or something else? Fear, which the water had momentarily alleviated, returned with full force. The jaguar's absence was an even greater burden than its presence. It was the guardian, the barrier between the elderly woman and the invisible dangers of the jungle. Without it, every shadow, every sound was a potential threat. She stumbled again, this time on a tangle of roots, falling face down. The sharp pain in her knee made her groan, but she forced herself to get up. There was no time for self-pity. Night was approaching, and with it, the darkness that revealed the island's true predators. She needed shelter, a safe place, however illusory. Her eyes, now more accustomed to the forest gloom, scanned the terrain. She spotted a small recess in a rocky outcrop, partially covered by dense vegetation. It was not ideal, but it was the best she had found. With renewed effort, she crawled towards the spot, feeling her skin scratch on thorny branches and leaves. The space was cramped, damp, and the smell of earth and moss was strong. But it offered an illusion of safety, a small refuge in the heart of the hostile wilderness. As she settled, trying to make the dirt and stone floor minimally bearable, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with dramatic shades of orange and purple. The sounds of the jungle changed. The chirping of daytime birds gave way to the croaking of frogs, the distant cries of monkeys, and other more sinister and unknown noises. The wind blew colder, and the night's humidity began to penetrate her bones. The elderly woman huddled, hugging her knees, trying to conserve the little warmth left in her body. Hunger was still a constant pain, but the fear of the night was greater. She closed her eyes, imagining the jaguar, its soft, warm fur, its amber eyes that had protected her. Would it be madness to hope it would return? Would it be foolish to believe that nature, so cruel, could also be so merciful? The tension was palpable, a rope stretched tight in her chest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, every dancing shadow at the entrance of her small shelter made her heart race. She was alone, completely alone. The jaguar had not returned. The thread of hope from the morning dissolved into despair. Her eyes fixed on the darkness of the entrance, trying to discern shapes, listening to every whisper of the wind, every snap of a branch. With each passing minute, the jaguar's absence became more palpable, more terrifying. Had it been just a mirage, a delusion of the mind, a single encounter, a single night of protection, and then abandonment? Hours dragged on, each seeming an eternity. The cold penetrated her bones, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She tried to convince herself that she was safe, that the vines would protect her, that the distant roar was not for her. But the truth was that she was just prey, fragile and defenseless, in the heart of a wild and unforgiving world. The tension was almost unbearable. She barely dared to breathe, fearing that the slightest sound would betray her. Her eyes burned, but she could not close them. The darkness was a veil that hid countless dangers, and with every shadow that danced at the entrance of her refuge, she imagined hungry eyes watching her. The night was a monster, and she was in its belly, waiting to be digested. The jaguar did not come. The silence of the jungle, at times, was more terrifying than its noises, for it meant that something was lurking, watching, waiting. And then a sound, a soft rustle, very close, coming from outside her shelter. It was not the wind. It was a deliberate movement. Her heart stopped. Whatever it was there, right there. And she was alone, completely alone. The soft rustle so close was not the wind. It was a deliberate, calculating movement. The elderly woman's heart stopped, suspended in icy terror. Whatever it was there, right there. And she was alone, completely alone. Her eyes, wide in the darkness, tried to pierce the veil of night, searching for a shape, a shadow that would betray the presence. The air became dense, heavy with expectation. She could smell the damp earth, the scent of decaying leaves, and now, a different smell. A wild, musky scent, not that of the jaguar. It was a predator's smell, but one she did not recognize, and this terrified her even more. A new sound, a slow, heavy dragging, as if something was moving cautiously, circling her small refuge. She held her breath, every muscle in her body tense, ready to react, though she knew she had nowhere to go, no strength to fight. Fear was a living creature, crawling up her spine, tightening her throat. She was at its mercy, cornered prey, awaiting the final blow. Her mind, amidst the panic, made one last trip to her son-in-law's mansion. That man, in his bubble of luxury and indifference, could never imagine the hell she was living. The irony was cruel. He threw her here to get rid of her, and now she was about to be devoured by something he could not even conceive. A wave of anger, pure and burning, washed away the fear for an instant. No, she would not give him that satisfaction. She would not die like this, not here. But anger was a luxury her exhausted body could not sustain for long. The dragging sound intensified, accompanied by a low sniff, almost inaudible, but which resonated in her bones. It was sniffing. It was looking for the entrance. She could feel the vibration of the ground, the beast's proximity. The vines she had pulled to close the entrance were a joke, an illusory barrier against the brute force of the jungle. Her eyes fixed on the gap between the vines, where the darkness seemed even deeper. She imagined shining eyes, sharp teeth, claws ready to tear. What could it be? A wild boar? An aggressive tapir? Or something more sinister? A nocturnal predator that the island held in its depths? A low, guttural growl echoed in the night, making her shrink even further. It was not the jaguar's growl. It was harsher, more primal, laden with murderous intent. She felt the scent intensify, mixed with the warm, humid breath that seemed to penetrate the vines. It was there, exactly at the entrance, Hot tears began to stream down her dirty face, mixing with cold sweat. It was the end. She had fought, survived thirst, hunger, scorching heat. But the night, the relentless island night, was about to claim her. The image of the jaguar, her improbable protector, flashed through her mind. Where was it? Had it finally grown tired of her company? Had it found easier prey, more worthy of its attention? Hope, so brief, had crumbled to dust. The growl grew louder, more menacing. A scratching sound like claws scraping on rock made her hairs stand on end. The creature was trying to force its way in. She closed her eyes, awaiting the impact, the pain, the end. But the impact did not come. Instead, a different sound, a deeper, more powerful growl that made the earth tremble. A growl she knew, a growl that had calmed her the night before. The jaguar's growl. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding, but now with a new emotion, a spark of hope. The jaguar's growl was not for her. It was for the other predator. Outside, the darkness stirred. She heard a grunt of surprise, followed by the sound of a quick, violent struggle. Animal cries, scratches, a rustling of leaves and broken branches. The jaguar had returned, and it was fighting for her. The confrontation lasted only a few seconds, but for the elderly woman, it seemed an eternity. She could imagine the scene outside. The jaguar, a golden and black spectre in the darkness, confronting the intruder, defending its territory, defending her. The jaguar's growl was now a warning roar, a sound that said, "Stay away." Then, silence. A different silence than before, not the silence of lurking, but the silence of victory. The other animal's scent disappeared, replaced by the familiar scent of the jaguar, an aroma of jungle, of power, of protection. She heard a soft movement, and then a familiar weight settled outside her entrance. A low, guttural purr vibrated through the rock, a sound that was both wild and comforting. The jaguar was there. Again, tears of relief, warm and abundant, streamed down her face. She was not alone. She never was. The jaguar had not abandoned her. It had returned to protect her. With a trembling sigh, the elderly woman allowed herself to relax, her body still aching, but her soul at peace. She reached out, feeling the thick, warm fur of the jaguar through the fragile barrier of vines. It was real. It was a miracle. The night was still dark, and the dangers of the island still lurked, but now she had her guardian. The jaguar, the wild beast, the supreme predator, was her only ally, her only hope. And as the soft purr cradled the darkness, the elderly woman knew that, however bizarre this alliance, it was her only chance to survive. With each breath of the jaguar, she felt a new wave of determination. She would survive, to prove to herself, to prove to her son-in-law, and perhaps to understand the mystery of this jaguar that had chosen her. The journey was far from over, but now she was no longer alone. Night slowly yielded to the promise of a new day. The dense darkness began to dilute into shades of grey and pale blue, and the nocturnal sounds of the jungle, once so menacing, were gradually replaced by the soft chirping of birds and the hum of awakening insects. The elderly woman, still huddled in her small refuge, felt her body stiff and sore, but a strange and deep peace had settled in her heart. The jaguar's purr, which had lulled her during the last hours, had ceased, replaced by a slow, deep breath that she could feel through the rock and vines. It was the breath of life, of protection, of constant presence. Cautiously, she pushed aside the vines a little, peering out. The faint light of dawn revealed the majestic silhouette of the jaguar lying in front of the entrance, its head resting on its paws, its eyes half closed. It looked like an ancient guardian, a living statue of strength and vigilance, a golden and black spectre that the jungle had sent to protect her. Its golden fur, speckled with dark rosettes, shimmered with the morning dew. There was no sign of the other predator, only disturbed earth and some trampled leaves, silent witnesses to the nocturnal battle. The island had witnessed, and the jaguar had won. A trembling sigh escaped her lips. She extended her hand again, this time with more confidence, and touched the jaguar's warm, soft fur through the gap in the vines. The beast slowly opened its eyes, a deep, penetrating green that looked at her without aggression, without fear, only with an ancestral stillness. The elderly woman withdrew her hand, not out of fear, but out of respect. There was a tacit understanding between them, an alliance forged in darkness and danger, a silent promise that she was no longer alone. Hunger and thirst, temporarily forgotten by the terror of the night, returned with renewed force. She needed water, food, but the idea of leaving the jaguar's protection, of venturing alone into the jungle, seemed unbearable. The jaguar, as if reading her thoughts, raised its head and watched her. Then, with a fluid and elegant movement, it stood up, stretched, and walked a few steps away from the entrance, turning to look at the elderly woman as if inviting her to follow. It was a silent but unmistakable invitation, a choice. To stay there, wasting away, or to trust the beast that had repeatedly saved her. The decision, deep down, was not difficult. She had no other option. With considerable effort, the elderly woman dragged herself out of the shelter, feeling the fresh, humid morning air on her skin. Her muscles protested, but adrenaline and determination propelled her. She would not give her son-in-law the satisfaction of dying there, alone and defenseless. The jaguar waited patiently, its eyes fixed on her. When the elderly woman was standing, swaying, the beast turned and began to walk slowly along the path it had made through the dense vegetation. It was a pace that the elderly woman, with her weak legs and exhausted body, could barely keep up with. But she followed, each step a testament to her will to live, each leaf that bent under her feet a small victory. The morning jungle was a spectacle of life and colors. The birdsong was louder now, and the sunlight filtered through the tree canopies, creating a play of shadows and gleams on the forest floor. But the beauty was deceptive. She knew that, behind every leaf, every bush, danger still lurked. The jaguar's presence, however, was an invisible shield. Other animals seemed to sense the predator's presence, keeping a respectful distance, a reverent silence. The jaguar guided her with a silent purpose. It was not a hunt. It did not seem to be. It was more like a pilgrimage, a search for sustenance and security. After what seemed an eternity, they reached a small clearing. In the center, a spring of crystal-clear water bubbled up from among the moss-covered rocks. The elderly woman felt such intense relief that her legs gave way. She knelt, her hands trembling, and drank the fresh, pure water, feeling life return with every sip. The jaguar watched her closely, sitting a few feet away, like a silent guardian, allowing her the vulnerability of quenching her thirst. After quenching her thirst, the elderly woman washed her face, feeling the dirt and sweat come off. She looked at the jaguar, a faint smile appearing on her cracked lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. The jaguar merely blinked slowly, as if it understood, as if the word was not necessary. The journey continued. The jaguar led her to a bush laden with small, juicy red fruits. The elderly woman hesitated, unsure if they were edible, but the jaguar sniffed them, and then looked at her, as if encouraging her. Cautiously, she picked one and tasted it. It was sweet and slightly acidic, delicious. She ate as many as she could, feeling a small amount of energy slowly return to her body, a small miracle amidst the despair. With each step, with each discovery, the elderly woman felt a deeper connection to the jaguar and to the island itself. The jungle, which before was a hell, now revealed its secrets, its resources, guided by her protector. But the sense of security was fragile. She knew she could not rely on the jaguar forever or for everything. The island was vast and time was running out. As they walked, the jaguar suddenly stopped, its ears alert, its body tense, its eyes fixed on something in the distance, something the elderly woman could not see but could feel. A shiver ran down her spine. Danger, even with the jaguar by her side, was never far away. The beast let out a low, almost inaudible growl, but laden with a primal warning. The elderly woman followed the jaguar's gaze, and through the dense foliage glimpsed a metallic glint. It was not natural. It was something man-made, a piece of metal perhaps, or something more. The tension in the air was palpable. The jaguar did not move, but its posture said it all. There was something there, something new, something that did not belong in the jungle. And the jaguar, her guardian, was ready to face whatever came. The island held more secrets than she imagined, and not all of them were wild. The metallic glint, a fleeting flash through the dense foliage, yet unmistakable. It was not the sun's reflection on water, nor the damp sheen of a leaf. It was something hard, cold, artificial. The jaguar's low growl confirmed what the elderly woman already felt. A new danger, different from anything the jungle had thrown at her so far. The beast, once so fluid and confident, was now tense, muscles contracted, eyes fixed on the invisible point. It was a posture of alert, but also of caution, as if the island's supreme predator was facing something it did not fully comprehend. The elderly woman felt a shiver run down her spine, colder than the morning dew. What could it be? A piece of a plane, a shipwreck, or something more sinister, a vestige of the human cruelty that had led her there? Curiosity, mixed with a primal fear, propelled her. She needed to know. She needed to understand. The jaguar, as if sensing her determination, moved slowly, clearing a path through the vegetation, but with each step, its body remained tense, its senses sharpened. It was not just guiding, it was protecting, scanning the environment for any threat that might arise from that strange object. The trail the jaguar opened was slower now, more deliberate. The elderly woman followed closely, her heart pounding in her chest, each beat an echo of uncertainty. The jungle's silence seemed deeper, more charged, as if nature itself was holding its breath, awaiting the revelation. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves now mingled with a subtle odor of rusted metal, of something old and abandoned. The vegetation opened into a small clearing, and there it was. It was not a plane, nor a boat. It was something more enigmatic, more disturbing. In the center of the clearing, partially swallowed by undergrowth and vines, lay a metallic structure, rusted and corroded by time and humidity. It appeared to be the remains of a small station, perhaps for research or an observation post. Broken solar panels lay on the ground, covered in moss, and what looked like a communication antenna was twisted, pointing to the sky like an accusing finger. The jaguar stopped at the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on the structure, a low, continuous growl vibrating in its throat. It was a sound of warning, of disapproval. The beast did not like it. The elderly woman, however, felt a strange attraction. This was proof that other humans had been there. A spark of hope arose in her chest, quickly stifled by distrust. Who were these people? Why did they leave? And what did they leave behind? With an effort, she disengaged from the jaguar, which watched her with an almost human intensity. The beast did not stop her, but its green eyes followed her, vigilant. The elderly woman walked towards the structure, her steps echoing in the clearing's silence. The metal was cold to the touch, rough and covered with a layer of rust. She felt the walls, sensing the irregular texture, the holes of corrosion. It was like touching a ghost of the past, a memory of a presence that should not be there. Inside what remained of the station, the air was dense and stuffy, with a smell of mold and decomposition. There was some broken equipment, exposed wires, and what looked like an overturned metal table. In a corner, half hidden under a pile of debris, she spotted something that caught her attention. A small, seemingly sealed metal box, partially buried in the damp earth. The jaguar, outside, let out a louder growl, a more urgent warning. But the elderly woman could not stop. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. With trembling hands, she began to dig the earth around the box, feeling the dampness and dirt under her nails. It took a few minutes of arduous effort, but finally, the box was free. It was heavy, made of sturdy metal, and seemed to have been designed to withstand the elements. There was no padlock, just a simple but corroded latch. With a sigh, she managed to open it. The smell of mold and old paper rose, but the contents were surprisingly intact. Inside, there was a small leather-bound diary, a rolled-up map, and a strange object made of metal and glass that she could not identify. The diary seemed to be the most important. With trembling hands, she picked it up. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was still legible. The jaguar outside began to pace in circles, its restlessness growing. Its growls were now more frequent, deeper, as if it sensed an invisible threat approaching. The elderly woman felt the same, a feeling that she was not alone, that whatever had happened there was not entirely in the past. She opened the diary to the first page. The handwriting was small and precise, but the words were disturbing. Day 1. We arrived at Island X. The team is excited, but the captain seems apprehensive. He speaks of local legends of an island guardian, a beast that protects the deepest secrets. The elderly woman gasped. Island guardian? The jaguar? She turned the page, her breath caught in her throat. Day 15. Experiments are progressing. The results are promising, but the side effects on the animals are concerning. The guardian has been appearing more frequently. Its eyes watch us from the darkness. I feel it knows what we are doing. A chill ran through the elderly woman's body. Experiments. What were they doing on this remote island? And the jaguar, her protector, had been watching it all from the beginning. The tension was almost unbearable. She looked at the jaguar, which was now closer to the station entrance, its eyes fixed on the jungle's darkness, not on her. There was something more. Day 30. We lost contact with base. The storm was brutal, but I feel it wasn't just nature. The Guardian was furious. The animals we used in the experiment, they went mad. There were screams, blood. I don't know who survived. I hid. I think I'm the only one left. The elderly woman let the diary fall to the ground, her hands covering her mouth in shock. Blood, experiments. The island was not just a wild paradise. It was a graveyard of secrets, an abandoned laboratory, a stage for horrors. And the jaguar, her guardian, was not just a protector but an avenger, a primal force that had risen against those who desecrated its home. The jaguar's growl intensified, turning into a low, guttural roar. It was not a roar of fight, but of warning, of imminent danger. The elderly woman looked out and saw the jaguar raise its head, its ears at maximum alert. Its green eyes glowed in the gloom, fixed on something moving at the edge of the clearing. It was not an animal, it was a shadow, a human silhouette, slender and furtive, sneaking through the trees, observing the station. The island was not deserted. And the jaguar knew the danger was not just the past, but the present, and it was watching them. The jaguar's roar, now a guttural, deep sound, cut through the dense air of the clearing, no longer a warning, but a declaration of war. The elderly woman, with the diary still at her feet, felt her heart pound in her chest, a frantic drum echoing the beat of fear. The silhouette, that slender, furtive shadow sneaking through the trees, was not an illusion. It was real, and it was watching them. The jaguar, her protector, did not hesitate. Its green eyes, once fixed on the jungle's darkness, now glowed with fierce intensity, directed at the point where the shadow moved. The beast's muscular body tensed, ready to attack, every nerve vibrating with primal energy. It was not just a guardian, it was a warrior, and the intruder had crossed an invisible line. The elderly woman, paralyzed by terror, could barely breathe. Who was that person? One of the scientists who survived the experiments? A new intruder? The island, which for a brief moment had revealed itself as a sanctuary of secrets, now transformed again into a deadly trap. The smell of mold and decomposition from the abandoned station mingled with the cold sweat that ran down her forehead. The jaguar let out another roar, louder this time, a direct challenge. The shadow retreated slightly, disappearing for an instant, only to reappear further on, moving with almost supernatural agility. It was not an animal, it was a human, and it seemed to know how to move in the jungle. A dry crack echoed in the clearing. The elderly woman flinched. It was not a branch breaking, it was the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. A muffled shot, but real. The jaguar, however, did not retreat. Instead, it lunged forward, a golden and black blur, disappearing into the foliage towards the origin of the sound. "No!" the elderly woman whispered, her voice hoarse, but it was too late. The jaguar had already become a part of the jungle, an unstoppable force. She knew she couldn't stay there. The diary, the map, and the strange object lay on the ground. With trembling hands, she picked them up, clutching them to her chest. They were the only link to the truth, the only chance to understand what was happening. The station, once a refuge of curiosity, now seemed like a tomb. She needed to get out, needed to hide, needed to find the jaguar. With an effort, she crawled out of the structure, her eyes sweeping the clearing. The silence that followed the roar and the shot was even more terrifying. Where was the jaguar, and where was the shooter? She hid behind one of the broken solar panels, the cold, rusted metal against her back. Fear consumed her, but a new emotion began to emerge: anger. Anger at being abandoned, anger at the experiments, anger at being thrown into this hell, and anger at anyone who dared to harm her protector. The diary in her hands seemed to pulse with the truth. Day 30. There were screams, blood. I don't know who survived. I hid. I think I'm the only one left. The words echoed in her mind. Could that shooter be the author of the diary, or one of the experiments that went mad? A rustle of leaves. Close. Too close. The elderly woman held her breath, her eyes fixed on the edge of the clearing. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving cautiously, a weapon in hand. It was not her son-in-law. It was a thin man with torn clothes and an unshaven beard, his eyes wild and suspicious. He looked like a ghost, a survivor of a nightmare. He didn't see her. His eyes were fixed on the station, on the open box, on the diary she had read. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone. The elderly woman retreated further into the shadows, her heart pounding. She couldn't make a sound. She couldn't be discovered. The man approached the station, his weapon raised, scanning the interior. He seemed frustrated, perhaps not finding what he was looking for. Then his eyes fell on the spot where the jaguar had disappeared. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "The Guardian," he murmured, his voice hoarse and full of hatred. "Finally, you showed your face." He turned, and for an instant his eyes swept the area where the elderly woman was hidden. She froze, barely daring to breathe. He didn't see her, but the tension was unbearable. He was looking for the jaguar, and he hated it. The man began to move in the direction the jaguar had gone, his steps calculated, his weapon ready. The elderly woman knew she couldn't let him go. The jaguar was in danger. Her protector, the only creature that had kept her alive, was about to face a human enemy, armed and thirsty for revenge. She looked at the map in her hands. It was a rudimentary map of the island with some strange markings and the metal and glass object. It was a type of compass, but different, with symbols she didn't recognize. Were they clues? Tools? The man's voice echoed again, more distant now, but still audible. "You can't hide forever, beast. I'm going to end this. For all of them." The elderly woman clenched her teeth. She was not a warrior. She was an elderly woman, abandoned, frightened, but she couldn't leave the jaguar alone, not after everything. With a determination she didn't know she possessed, she crawled out of her hiding place, the map and the strange object clutched in her hands. She didn't have a weapon, but she had something the man didn't: knowledge. The diary, the scientist's words, the truth about the experiments. Perhaps that could be her weapon. She followed the sound of the man's footsteps, moving with the caution the jaguar had taught her. The jungle, which before was a labyrinth of dangers, now seemed an ally. Every leaf, every branch, every shadow could be a hiding place, an opportunity. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves guided her. She didn't know what she would do when she reached him, but she knew she had to try. The jaguar's life, and perhaps her own, depended on it. The hunt had begun, but this time the prey was armed with the truth, and the elderly woman was not alone. The island's guardian was in danger, and its protected one was coming to its aid. The heavy jungle air seemed to vibrate with tension, every leaf, every branch, a potential betrayer. The elderly woman with the diary, the map, and the strange metal and glass object clutched to her chest, moved with a caution the jaguar had taught her. Her muscles, already aching from the journey, protested with every step, but adrenaline and a growing fury propelled her. She was not a hunter, but her protector's life was at stake, and that was enough to turn fear into an iron determination. The man's steps ahead were calculated, almost inaudible in the dense forest. He was a ghost, a predator who knew every shadow, every sound. The elderly woman followed him, her eyes fixed on the occasional rustle of leaves, the slight sway of a vine that betrayed his passage. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves mingled with the metallic odor of gunpowder, a cruel reminder of the shot that had echoed moments before. "You can't hide forever, beast. I'm going to end this. For all of them." The man's hoarse voice, now closer, cut through the silence, laden with visceral hatred. The elderly woman flinched but did not stop. The diary's words echoed in her mind. "Day 30. We lost contact with base. The storm was brutal, but I feel it wasn't just nature. The Guardian was furious. The animals we used in the experiments, they went mad. There were screams, blood. I don't know who survived. I hid. I think I'm the only one left." Could that man be the author of the diary? The scientist who had hidden, a witness to the horrors he himself helped create? Or was he one of the experiments gone mad, transformed by the island and by revenge? The elderly woman did not know, but the cruelty in his voice left no doubt. He was dangerous. She crept through the giant ferns, her heart beating like an uncontrolled drum. The map in her hands seemed to pulse with a secret. It was rudimentary, but some markings stood out. Circles, crosses, and a shaded area that seemed to be the center of the island. The metal and glass object, the different compass, remained inert, its unknown symbols offering no immediate clue. But she felt they were important, pieces of a deadly puzzle. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves ceased. An oppressive silence fell over the jungle, more terrifying than any roar. The elderly woman stopped, holding her breath, her eyes sweeping the darkness. The man had stopped, and if he stopped, it was because he had found something, or someone. A low growl, almost a lament, cut through the air. It was not the furious roar of the jaguar she knew, but a sound of pain, of restraint. The elderly woman felt a tightening in her chest. Was the jaguar wounded or cornered? She crawled forward, ignoring the pain in her knees and back, until she reached a small clearing hidden by a curtain of vines. Through the foliage, she saw. The man was there, standing, his weapon raised, pointed at a spot on the ground. His eyes, wild and full of cold madness, gleamed in the gloom. The jaguar was cornered, not by a trap, but by a natural rock formation, a small, shallow cave. Its golden and black body was tense, but there was a wound on its front paw, a dark stain that contrasted with its fur. It growled, a guttural sound of pain and defiance, but did not lunge. It seemed to be protecting something. The elderly woman clutched the diary to her chest. The man was about to shoot. She needed to do something, but what? She was an elderly woman, fragile, unarmed. "It's over. Beast," the man hissed, a cruel smile distorting his lips. "You killed my friends. You destroyed everything. Now it's your turn." Friends. So he wasn't the author of the diary, but perhaps one of the other scientists or one of the experiments that went mad. The jaguar, the guardian, had taken revenge, and he was there to retaliate. The man adjusted his aim. The elderly woman felt panic rise in her throat. She looked at the diary, at the map, at the object. Knowledge. That was her weapon. But how to use it? Her eyes fell on the metal and glass object, the different compass. As the man prepared for the final shot, the elderly woman with trembling hands turned the object. A small, almost invisible button was hidden on the side. Without thinking, she pressed it. A low hum, almost inaudible, emanated from the object. The unknown symbols on its surface began to glow with a faint blue light. And then a sound. Not a loud sound, but a sharp hiss, a strange frequency that seemed to cut through the air. The man flinched. He lowered his weapon for an instant, his hands covering his ears. "What is that?" he murmured, his voice distorted, his wild eyes sweeping the clearing. The jaguar, despite its injury, raised its head, its eyes fixed on the object in the elderly woman's hands. It seemed to recognize the sound. The hiss intensified, becoming a vibration that seemed to penetrate her bones. The man fell to his knees, his weapon slipping from his hands clutching his head. His eyes were wide, filled with pain and confusion. "No! Not again!" he screamed, his voice a lament of agony. The elderly woman realized. The object was not a compass, it was a device. Perhaps one that the scientists used in the experiments with the animals, a frequency that drove them mad, and now it was affecting the man. The jaguar, taking advantage of the aggressor's distraction, let out a furious roar, a sound of pure revenge. Despite its injured paw, it lunged out of the cave, not towards the man, but into the darkness of the jungle, towards a path the elderly woman could not see. It was fleeing, but it was also protecting something. The man, still on his knees, tried to get up, but the sound of the device brought him down. The elderly woman, her heart still pounding, knew she couldn't stay there. She had created a distraction, a chance, but the jaguar was injured, and the man, even in agony, was still a threat. She looked at the diary, at the map. The map had a marking of a shaded area in the center of the island, and the diary spoke of deepest secrets. Perhaps the jaguar was going there. Perhaps what it protected was there. With a last look at the man writhing on the ground, the elderly woman turned off the device, the sudden silence almost as deafening as the hiss. She turned, and with new urgency, followed in the direction the jaguar had disappeared, the map in one hand, the strange object in the other. The hunt was not over. It had merely changed course, and the elderly woman, the abandoned woman, was now at the center of a mystery that could save everyone or condemn them. The silence that followed the device being turned off was almost as deafening as the sharp hiss that had preceded it. The elderly woman, her heart still pounding in her chest, knew that time was short. The man, though momentarily incapacitated, would not remain so for long. The fury in his eyes, the thirst for revenge, were palpable. He was a wounded predator, and wounded predators are the most dangerous. She turned, her eyes sweeping the jungle's darkness in the direction the jaguar had disappeared. There was no clear trail, but intuition, sharpened by her time with the feline, guided her. There was a faint rustle of leaves, a more intense smell of disturbed earth, an invisible trail to untrained eyes, but one she now seemed able to decipher. The jaguar was injured, and the urgency in its movement indicated that what it protected was of utmost importance. With the map in one hand and the strange metal and glass object in the other, the elderly woman began to move again. Every step was a battle against the pain in her muscles, but adrenaline and determination propelled her. The jungle, once a labyrinth of horrors, now seemed to whisper secrets, offering paths and hiding places. She was not just following the jaguar, she was following the truth. The map, rudimentary as it was, began to make more sense. The shaded area in the center of the island, once a mystery, now seemed to be the destination. The scientist's diary spoke of deepest secrets, of experiments that had gone out of control. Was this the epicenter of it all, the place where the Guardian had been created, or where the island had revealed its true nature? As she advanced, the elderly woman noticed something strange about the metal and glass object. The bluish symbols, which had glowed when the button was pressed, now pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, and the light seemed to intensify slightly in the direction of the map's shaded area. It was not an ordinary compass, but it seemed to be a guide, a beacon to something hidden. She found traces of the jaguar's passage, a leaf stained with a drop of dark blood, a branch broken unnaturally. The feline's paw injury was real, and with each sign, the elderly woman's concern grew. The jaguar was strong, but not invincible, and the man she knew would not give up. His voice, though still weak, echoed in the distance, laden with renewed anger. "I'll find you, both of you. No one defies me and lives." He was recovering, and his fury seemed to have intensified. The elderly woman felt a shiver down her spine. He not only hunted her, he hated her. And now he knew she was involved, that she had used the device against him. The vegetation began to change. The trees became older, their canopies denser, filtering sunlight into greenish and golden shafts. The air grew heavier, laden with a strange metallic and earthy smell at the same time, like that of an impending storm. There was a sense of latent, almost electric energy in the environment. The object in her hands vibrated more intensely now, the bluish light of the symbols brighter. She was getting closer. The shaded area was not just a part of the forest, it was a place with a unique, energetic signature. Suddenly, the elderly woman found herself facing a natural barrier, a rock wall covered with moss and vines that seemed to stretch across the entire width of the island. It was as if the island itself was protecting its deepest secret. But there was a crack, a narrow, almost invisible opening that seemed to lead inside. The object in her hands pulsed frantically, pointing to the crack. She hesitated for an instant. What awaited her inside? The diary spoke of experiments, of screams and blood. But the jaguar had gone that way, and the jaguar was injured, protecting something. With a sigh of determination, the elderly woman clutched the diary to her chest and squeezed through the crack. The air inside was damp and cold, with an even stronger and peculiar smell. Light was almost non-existent, and she had to feel her way, relying on the faint glow of the device. The crack opened into a larger cavern, but it was not a natural cave. The walls were strangely smooth in some places, with traces of corroded metal and dangling cables. It was an artificial structure, swallowed by the jungle and by time. An underground laboratory? The heart of the shaded area? She saw the jaguar's trail more clearly now, paw prints in the damp dust and a few more drops of blood. The feline was ahead, deeper into the structure. Then She heard a sound. It was not a growl, nor a lament. It was a cry, a low cry, almost inaudible but unmistakable, a cub's cry. The elderly woman stopped, her breath caught in her throat. Cubs! The jaguar was not just protecting a secret, it was protecting its family. And the man, with his thirst for revenge, was coming to destroy everything. The sound of the man's footsteps, now closer, echoed through the cavern, amplified by the stone and metal walls. He had found the entrance. The elderly woman was cornered, but not alone. The jaguar and its cubs were there, and she had the diary, the map, and the device. Knowledge was her weapon, and truth her shield. But would it be enough against the blind fury of a man? The hunt had reached its most critical point, and the fate of the island, of the jaguar and its cubs, and of the elderly woman herself, was about to be decided in the depths of that forgotten place. The echo of the man's footsteps reverberated through the damp, cold walls of that forgotten structure. Each beat a hammer in the elderly woman's chest. He was inside, and the darkness, once her ally, now seemed a cloak that made her even more vulnerable. The heavy air smelled of mold, rusted metal, and something else, something chemical and ancient that brought to mind the dark pages of the diary. This was not a natural place. It was an open wound on the island, a testament to human arrogance. She clutched the diary to her chest, the map on its surface almost invisible in the gloom. The device in her other hand pulsed with a more intense bluish light now, a silent and insistent guide. The cub's cries, faint and intermittent, pulled her forward, a primal call that transcended fear. The jaguar was there, wounded, but not broken, fighting to protect its offspring. And the elderly woman, the abandoned woman, felt that the lives of those small beings depended on her. With her heart in her throat, she moved, feeling her way along the walls. The crack had opened into a narrow corridor, the smooth, cold surfaces beneath her fingers revealing the hand of man, not nature. Corroded cables hung from the low ceiling like dead snakes, and puddles of dark water reflected the faint glow of the device. With each step, the man's sound became more distinct, his heavy breathing, his grunts of fury echoing. He was looking for her, for them. "You wretched old woman." His voice tore through the silence, laden with hatred. "You won't hide from me. I'll finish what I started." The elderly woman flinched, panic threatening to paralyze her. But the cub's cries propelled her. She could not fail. She could not surrender. The device in her hand vibrated more strongly, pointing to an opening on the left, a rusted metal door, ajar. That was where the jaguar had gone. She squeezed through the door's gap, entering a larger chamber. The animal smell was strong here, mixed with the metallic odor and that of fresh blood. The device's bluish light revealed a scene that wrenched the elderly woman's heart. In the center of the room, on a pile of dry leaves and moss, lay 3 small jaguar cubs, blind and helpless, their tiny bodies trembling as they cried. And beside them, protectively curled, was the spotted jaguar, its front paw bleeding profusely. The feline's eyes, once so full of ferocity and pride, now showed a mixture of pain and despair. It tried to get up upon seeing the elderly woman, but a groan of pain escaped its throat, and it fell back, its eyes fixed on the woman, a silent plea. The guardian, the protector, was at its limit. "My dear," the elderly woman whispered, her voice choked. She knelt, ignoring the pain in her own knees, and extended her hand to the jaguar. The feline, in a surprising act of trust, rested its head on the elderly woman's hand. A faint, painful purr. It was a moment of deep connection, of mutual loyalty forged in adversity. The man was close. The sound of his footsteps was almost at the chamber door. The elderly woman looked at the cubs, so small, so vulnerable. She looked at the wounded jaguar, its strength ebbing. And then, her eyes fell on the diary. The scientist's words, once mere scribbles, now took on a new and terrible meaning. Experiments, frequency control, genetic modification. This place was not just a laboratory, it was a nursery of horrors, the place where the jaguar, perhaps, had been created or modified, and where its cubs were living proof of a dangerous legacy. The device in her hand pulsed frantically, its bluish light now illuminating a series of rusted control panels on the opposite wall, and what appeared to be a large metal cage, empty, but with traces of something that had been kept there. The different compass was not just a guide, it was a key. The man appeared at the door, his weapon drawn, his wild eyes sweeping the chamber. He saw the elderly woman, the wounded jaguar, and finally, the cubs. A sick smile spread across his lips. "So this is where you hide, beast, and you brought company. How touching, but it won't change anything." He pointed the weapon at the jaguar. The elderly woman felt her blood run cold. "No!" she screamed, raising the device. "Stop! What do you want?" The man laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the chamber. "What do I want? Revenge. You killed my friends, you destroyed years of research, and now I'm going to destroy what you love most." He was not just referring to the jaguar, but perhaps to the very concept of wildlife, of untouched nature. He was one of the scientists, or one of the experiments that had turned against everything. The elderly woman knew she had no time. She looked at the device, at the control panels. The diary spoke of frequencies that could calm or agitate animals, and the man had reacted to the device's frequency with excruciating pain. "You don't understand," the elderly woman said, her voice trembling, but with a new resolution. "This place is your ruin and your salvation." She pressed the device's button again. The sharp hiss filled the chamber, but this time, the elderly woman did not point it at the man. Instead, she rotated it, the bluish light sweeping across the rusted control panels. The symbols on the device seemed to interact with the panels, and to the man's horror and the elderly woman's surprise, the lights on the panels began to flash and a low electrical hum filled the air. "What are you doing?" the man shouted, stepping back. His weapon still pointed, but his confidence shaken. The elderly woman didn't know. She was acting on instinct, guided by the diary and the device. She was trying to activate something, deactivate something, or perhaps just destabilize the environment. The device's hiss intensified, and the hum from the panels became a roar. The chamber began to shake. Dust and small pieces of rock fell from the ceiling. The jaguar, despite the pain, raised its head, its eyes fixed on the elderly woman, a spark of understanding. The cubs, frightened, cried louder. "This place is going to collapse!" the man screamed, panic seizing his voice. He turned, ready to flee, to escape the trap the elderly woman had inadvertently activated. But the elderly woman did not move. She looked at the jaguar, at the cubs. She couldn't leave them. The diary in her hands seemed to vibrate. The words, "deepest secrets" and "irreversible consequences" echoed in her mind. She was not just fighting for her life. She was fighting to correct a mistake, to protect nature from human insanity. The ground shook violently. A crack opened in the wall, and water began to gush out. The island was reacting, or perhaps the structure itself was disintegrating under the device's influence. The man, in his desperation, tried to shoot, but the tremor unbalanced him, and the shot went into the ceiling, causing more debris to fall. The elderly woman knew it was now or never. She had a choice: flee and save herself, or stay and fight, even if it meant the end. But she was not alone. The jaguar, the guardian, looked at her with an intensity that spoke of an unbreakable alliance, and the cubs, the future, depended on her. The hunt had become a race against time, against a man's fury, and against the island itself that seemed to want to swallow its secrets back. The roar that followed the device's activation was not just the sound of twisting metal or yielding rock. It was the island's cry, nature expelling the poison that infested it. The chamber shook with a violence that threw the elderly woman to the ground. The diary and the device flying from her hands. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling like deadly rain, and cracks in the walls opened like wounds, gushing dark, cold water. The air filled with a pungent smell of wet earth, rusted metal, and ozone, the scent of something ancient and dangerous being undone. The man, in his blind panic, screamed, his voice distorted by fear and fury. He staggered, his weapon still in hand, but his eyes were no longer fixed on the elderly woman or the jaguar. They were fixed on the exit, on escape. "I'm getting out of here!" he bellowed, more to himself than to them, and began to run, stumbling over the rubble towards the door he had entered. But the island had other plans. A corroded metal beam crashed from the ceiling, blocking the passage. The man hit it, a sharp cry of pain and frustration escaping his lips. He was trapped. The elderly woman, despite the pain in her hips and knees, crawled back to the jaguar. The feline, despite its injured paw, tried to curl even more over its cubs, protecting them from the chaos. Its eyes, once full of plea, now shone with fierce determination, an acceptance of fate, but also a promise to fight to the end. The elderly woman picked up the diary, its pages crumpled, but the words still visible. The device lying near her pulsed with a fainter bluish light now, as if its energy was draining, or perhaps its task was almost complete. The ground opened beneath their feet, a deep crack that swallowed part of the pile of dry leaves where the cubs were. The jaguar growled, a sound of pure despair. The elderly woman acted on instinct, pushing the feline and the cubs away from the crack, using her own body as a shield. She felt the warmth of the jaguar's body, the scent of its fur, life pulsing beneath her hand. There was no more fear, only a primal need to protect. The man, seeing the elderly woman and the jaguar together, a last flicker of hatred crossed his face. "You'll die here," he screamed, trying to get up, but the ground gave way again, this time beneath his own feet. He slipped into a crack, a sharp, terrified scream cutting the air before being muffled by the sound of rocks falling and gushing water. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the cubs' cries and the roar of the collapsing island. The millionaire, the predator, had been swallowed by the very monster he had helped create. The elderly woman knew there was no time. The chamber was disintegrating. She looked at the jaguar, which, despite the pain, tried to drag itself closer to her. The cubs, now calmer, huddled together, the diary in her hands, the map, the device. They had served their purpose. They had guided her to the truth, to the jaguar's family, to the heart of the island. A new opening appeared in the opposite wall, not a door, but a natural crack created by the collapse. The fresh night air entered through it, bringing the scent of the jungle and the promise of freedom. It was narrow, but perhaps enough. The elderly woman pointed to it. "That way," she whispered to the jaguar, her voice hoarse. The feline understood. With a monumental effort, it began to drag itself, pushing the cubs ahead. The elderly woman helped, gently nudging the small bodies, guiding them to the crack. It was a desperate struggle. The ground continued to shake, the ceiling to collapse. The elderly woman felt a sharp pain in her leg, but ignored it. Her focus was the jaguar and its cubs. Finally, the feline and the three small bodies slipped through the crack into the darkness outside. The elderly woman turned to follow, but a final wave of tremors dislodged a huge slab of stone from the ceiling, blocking the passage. She was trapped. The jaguar outside growled, a sound of anguish and fury. The elderly woman could hear its desperate scratches on the stone, trying to move the obstacle. But it was useless. The elderly woman placed her hand on the cold rock, feeling the jaguar's vibrations from the other side. She smiled, a sad but peaceful smile. "Go, my dear," she whispered, knowing the jaguar would hear her somehow. "Protect your cubs. Live." She sat on the ground, exhausted, but with a strange sense of accomplishment. The device in her hand was now completely dark. The diary in her lap seemed to weigh a ton, laden with the secrets of an era. The island was collapsing, swallowing the vestiges of human madness, purifying itself. The rarefied air of the chamber grew heavier, the smell of earth and metal more intense. The elderly woman closed her eyes, the images of the jaguar and its cubs, safe, etched in her mind. She had been abandoned, yes, but she found a purpose, a family, a reason to fight. She had become the guardian of a secret, the protector of threatened wildlife. Outside, the spotted jaguar, with its cubs safe in a small grotto, looked at the now sealed entrance of the structure. A deep lament escaped its throat, a sound of loss and gratitude. It had lost its ally, the woman who, against all odds, had become its protector. But it had saved its cubs, the future of its lineage. The island continued to tremble for a few more hours, the sounds of collapse echoing through the jungle. When the sun rose, a new day dawned on a transformed landscape. The entrance to the underground laboratory had disappeared, swallowed by the earth and vegetation. The shaded area was now just a memory, a silent warning. The jaguar, with its cubs, emerged from the grotto limping, but with new strength in its eyes. It looked at the horizon, at the vast ocean, and then at the dense forest. The island had healed, and with it, the hope of a new beginning. The elderly woman, the abandoned woman, had sacrificed herself, but her courage and loyalty had ensured the survival of an essential part of that paradise. Nature, in its relentless wisdom, had rewritten history, and the spotted jaguar, the guardian, would continue to watch over it, carrying with it the memory of the one who, in her last moments, had become part of the island itself. The elderly woman's legacy would not be forgotten, echoing in the jaguar's roars and the whisper of the wind through the trees, a song of sacrifice, redemption, and the untamed force of life.